Hey everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and you can see I've got my collection of pre-made bedding here on standby, as well as a little tray full of food ready to go. And I guess the question remains, which bin am I going to be working on today? Well, let me see if I can give you a little bit of a spoiler. That's right, I'm setting up a horizontal migration today, and it's for my oldest bin. It's a bin that we only checked in on a couple days ago. And at that point, it was already 6 months of age. It had already gone through 140 days of composting, and even at that point, 6 weeks of foraging. And at this point, after 45 days of foraging, and at an age of 185 days, I think that even though there's still a bunch of kind of uncomposted material lingering within this bin, I think the time has come to start moving the worms out of the finished material, almost finished material, so we can get them rounded up and relocated into a new home. While I was making some extra bedding yesterday, I also took the time to take a new bin and prep it for these little guys. So we've already got their new home sitting here and preparing, basically just sitting and lying in wait so that we can get the worms out of the old system. So let's get this guy up onto the bench and get to work. So for some people it might not be entirely clear what this is. Just a quick explanation. What I like to do when I set up one of these so-called horizontal migrations, and there too it's an expression that I use. I don't know if everyone knows what that means, but basically the worms are ultimately being convinced to migrate horizontally out of the material over into some area in the bin. And since these guys haven't received any fresh food in 45 days, the idea is that with some fresh food we should be able to lure them out of the somewhat finished compost pretty easily. I guess the more finished the compost it is, the more easy it is to get the worms to come over for some fresh food, just because of the absence, or at least scarcity of food in the environment that they inhabit. You can see a worm here in the plastic here too. Most recently I've just been sort of setting the plastic aside so that the worms don't all have to be plucked off and removed from here. So we'll just fold this in half, try to keep the moisture comfortable. And you can see the darkness here on the top of the surface is due to that moisture that keeps recirculating within the bin because of that plastic being there. So like I said, horizontal migration. The whole idea is that we're quartering off a section of the bin. It's going to be this side, I guess. And we'll sort of lay in a partition, more of a visual aid for me to see where the compost ends and where the feeding area begins. It's full of holes. The whole idea is to not be an obstacle to prevent the worms from getting over there. It's really just to help me see where the dividing line is between the two sections of the bin. So this is just some stuff over here which didn't get quite as much attention as the rest of the bin because it was sort of out there on the perimeter where a little bit more airflow occurs and a little bit more drying happens. So if the worms have a choice between some nice damp material down within the bin and that dry stuff, they're going to choose with the damp stuff every time. And the dry stuff gets a little bit neglected. I guess my idea here was to see if we can maybe limit the amount of remaining junk in this bin. There's all kinds of stuff that, you know, if we'd given the system more time to continue breaking down, we could get some of these pieces of wood and leftover avocado shell here, get some of these larger bits to continue breaking down over time. But it seems like such low value work from the worms. I guess, or at least that's the way one of the viewers expressed it, and it seemed to make a lot of sense to say, hey, well, you're kind of driving them down the road of needing to whittle down little tiny chunks of junk as opposed to being able to, you know, load in good amounts of food and whatnot that needs to be composted down. So rather than you know, playing that game for too long of a time, so I mean, I guess it's a good idea to sort of get them to work down a good amount of the material a little bit in advance of migrating them out, but to overdo it or continue running a foraging phase does seem to be a little bit counterproductive, I guess. Yeah, counterproductive seems like the right expression for that, right? So maybe the low nourishment type bedding and sticks and stems and stuff could result in your worms kind of losing mass, losing size, maybe reducing their numbers, just based on the assumption that maybe there's an absence or dwindling food supply. I don't know. It does seem to kind of make sense to use the worms to a certain point to break the material down to a certain degree, but not expect 100%. Because I mean, we start migration of the worms today, start getting them to begin moving out over into a nice freshly built bunch of bedding and food and everything. There's still going to be worms hanging out in this old stuff, continuing to work this stuff down too. And even if all the worms have been moved out, there's also the matter of there being, you know, a lot of microscopic life in the bin that continues to break the material down, even in the absence of the worms. It almost feels like if I were to just run all this stuff through a screen really quick, then the majority of it would just flow right through, and then we could easily pick out all these large chunks and maybe use all those large chunks as the bedding for our new feeding zone that we're going to use to motivate the worms to migrate. Well, I don't know. I guess there's always these options to optimize stuff. But at this point, I'm going to do what I usually do, which is nothing more than kind of shifting the material over into one edge of the bin, making myself some room so that I could just lay in some nice fresh bedding, some nice fresh food, and then begin the migration of the worms out of the material. And I just can't seem to resist picking all these larger chunks of material out of the compost as I work my way through it. I'm not really deliberately looking for these particles and bits. I'm kind of looking for a couple big mango seeds that I definitely wanted to remove. All these little things are kind of like whatever, but there was a couple large chunks of food left in here, from what I remember, that I'd really like to eliminate from the material. So if there's a bunch of worms keep stumbling on a couple good large size portions of food left behind in the bin, we could find that that material ends up serving as a little bit of a distraction, preventing the worms from doing what we want them to do, which is to leave. I thought yep, okay, we bumped into one of them here. Okay, just see if we can kind of get the majority of the worms that are hanging out inside of it out. I am attempting to keep my clean hand clean and do this job with a single hand, but for whatever reason they really like getting down deep into the shell of the mango. I usually don't go to this extent to try to evict the worms from the shell, but whatever it is in the shell that they like must be delicious, because there's, you know, like a crowd of them in there. Maybe it's the seed. I believe this is what's left of the seed that was actually in that husk. That too, I just can't seem to resist gathering it up and putting it back where it was. This might be yet another chunk of the same stuff. That might be what's causing the frenzy. So that's one of the things I wanted to extract for sure. I thought there was another piece. Only half of a shell, not the whole clam shell kind of complete husk, just one half of it. I thought it was also placed pretty close to that larger piece. Man, there's a good amount of material in the system here. All right, I'm going to start taking some of this stuff that we are going to recycle and use as the foundation for our feeding zone. Move it over so we can keep shifting the material off to the side. It's some good stuff, you know. There's this banana stem here, some pretty heavily worked bits of bedding. This must be the seed from something. I don't know, maybe it's a slice of the avocado pit that sometimes I slice the avocado pit into these little slices. I think it helps it break down in the long run. So all these little bits of leftover, all these avocado shells, Let's see what else we bump into. Might even find that other half of a mango seed. Just a little surprised that we didn't find it already. There was one time when I came in here looking for those things and I couldn't find either of them. It was kind of unusual. This time we got the bigger of the two. I guess if we're unable to locate the other one, it's not going to be a showstopper. I'm not going to spend the entire day trying to round up a little mango seed husk. We'll just have to live with the fact that there was a little distraction in here along the way. So if any worms just happen to be heading in the direction of our migration feeding zone and stumble on that, they might be deterred from actually making their way over here. But whatever, I don't think it's going to be earth-shattering. Alright, not much left to do here. Let's get things kind of reconstructed. Usually the way I do this is to place these two little dividers out here so I could see where I'm going to put things and look at it from the perspective of the size, proportions. It looks pretty good. We're going to end up backfilling some of this material, so this will drop down. But I like to try to build it to about the same height. If everything is more or less the same height, then I think that even gives the worms the option to even climb over the wall, if that just happens to be where they are. So I think this also just helps a little bit. Once I start piling material in one way or the other, it doesn't really push stuff all over the place. It's a little bit of extra support. I know that those are going to collapse over time, but it also kind of saves me from having to put that much material in these little kind of cavities to help me build this up to the height that I'd like without needing to go overboard on the material I use. This is just a combination of paper and cardboard out of my shredder, as well as some leaves mixed in. And the other thing that I kind of do is I take a little sample of some of my finished vermicompost and throw it into my container there that has the pre-made bedding in it. And I try to foster the growth of those microorganisms within my collection of pre-made bedding, so that it makes it that much more hospitable to the worm occupation or traffic or use or whatever you want to call it. If it's bedding, then maybe you're using it as stuff the worms are going to occupy. Maybe if it's a carbon food source perspective, then maybe it's food. But it's definitely both in all cases. Okay, so that was a little bit of coffee I threw in there, but you can see I've got plenty more coffee where that came from. So let's start stacking in the stuff that I bought down here for them. These are some pretty good size banana peels. And I got a feeling once they notice that there's some nice banana peels somewhere in the bin, because I got a feeling they could somehow sense it, you know, smell it or whatever it is. There's got to be something that tells them, hey, there's something good over here. But I'm not 100% sure of that. It just seems unlikely that it would all be left to chance, you know, that they don't have the ability to hunt things down that are nearby. Okay, that's a pretty good amount of coffee right there too. Hopefully we can kind of break up any larger chunks of the stuff. I just find that the coffee, if it's in a big lump, it doesn't really serve much purpose. The worms just seem to cruise right past it and don't express much interest in it. So it seems like it probably does better to be kind of combined with the nearby bedding and stuff. I would say we're about halfway there to the height that we're going to want to reach. Because at some point this will drop back down to a lower level once we level things off. Now, I don't know. Do I really want to go crazy putting large chunks of paper and bedding in here? Maybe I won't even tear it open. Maybe I'll just put it in here whole. Because you know what? If a whole bunch of worms, for whatever reason, find themselves drawn to that and pile into it, then maybe it'll just make for that much easier retrieval of the worms and even separation of the bedding, so that we can rebuild this feeding zone at some point. Because that's what I'll usually do, is I'll maybe haul out the worms from the feeding area on multiple occasions and then sort of do a reset. But I don't know, more recently I've been opting for just letting the migration run from start to finish and doing a single haul out at the very end of all the worms. So that's just some of the old stuff that I bought over. Maybe if we spread it out a little bit more equally on both sides, we can leverage it. So that's bringing with it all kinds of good, partially broken down food items, as well as this really tempting mango seed over here, plus the bacteria and fungi that the worms really like. So this is really turning out to be a really yummy looking feeding area, if you ask me. Now I've also got a couple bits of tomato in here, but I do intend to use all this stuff. So before we drop that in, maybe another little bit of bedding so that it has something to fall onto and fall into. I don't know if it helps. It just seems like it can't hurt, if you ask me. You know what? Where did we put that other coffee filter? It was on one of the side. Maybe it was the side closer to me, so we'll put this one on this side. How does that sound? Alright, can you tell I'm winging it? I'm looking around here. I don't think I've got any other food for these little guys, so I think we'll just proceed to getting this covered up nicely. I think we could use another handful or so of my pre-made bedding here. Give this at least some sort of a basic, consistent top covering. Not that it matters all that much. I had kind of hoped to get to the level of the top of the cardboard there. It doesn't matter so much. It's pretty close. Worms, I guess, come up to the edge, climb over, then it's just a short drop down into the feeding area for them. So I think this looks pretty good. We'll put the new feeding area into a little bit of a compressed mode here by leaning over the partition wall a bit. Then we can start leveling things off. I just somehow can't resist doing one or two probes through the material to see if I can possibly bump into that other mango seed. I don't know why. I'm kind of obsessed by it now, the fact that we couldn't locate it. But it's not that big of a deal. Like I said, there was one time when I went looking for either of them and I found not even one of them. So the fact that we found the bigger one's a pretty good thing. And this material is quite nice, I gotta say. It's got a nice moisture content to it. It all crumbles and flows nicely. And my hope is that it's full of cocoons too, because at some point soon, once the worms are lured out of it, collected and relocated, I believe that hanging on to this material for a little while longer, just to give the cocoons in it time to hatch too and round those up as well, is a worthwhile effort. So I guess I found little chunks of whatever this is, some sort of a little piece of food item, I'm assuming. I'll bring that over, as well as this avocado seed, but I had no luck bumping into that other piece of mango seed husk, so I'm going to leave it be. I'm sure at some point in the future, when we're back in here to examine the material and check on it, we'll find it and then we could move it over. And I don't think it's going to serve as a huge detriment or distraction. I just like to try to do anything I can, any little advantage that I can think of might help speed the process along. I'll try to see if it works, give it a go. But I'm not going to get too hung up on it. I think we're in pretty good shape here. This is a pretty full bin, especially now that we've jammed all the material over to one side. Luckily, we don't have to do any work in here anymore. It's really just letting it sit and maybe even letting it dry a little bit, because by becoming drier, it'll also, I believe, serve as inspiration for the worms to get out of it and go find something more cozy to be in, something more damp and comfortable. So let's start putting the coverings here back on. And you'll remember the plastic had covered the entire top surface, and the worms were even given direct access to the plastic so that they can climb up onto it if they want to, perhaps sip a little bit of the moisture off of it. And all these castings on the plastic are evidence of the fact that the worms do like hanging out on this stuff, because this is where the moisture that would otherwise evaporate, it just collects on this, and it makes for a really nice damp space beneath it. So we're going to continue using it in that capacity here, but we're going to focus it over only the feeding area anymore, allowing the rest of the material in the bin to have access to the air so that it can shed some of its moisture, evaporate, and dry a little bit. And it doesn't happen very fast because these castings do have a tremendous ability to hold on to moisture. But the top surface will dry a little bit, the material throughout will dry a little bit, and it'll probably help motivate some of the worms to move out. Alright, so I guess we'll start putting things back together here. These coverings don't really serve a whole lot of purpose anymore other than blocking the light out. Hopefully keeping things nice and dark so that the worms are comfortable moving around and moving throughout this material, ideally out of the material over time. So today we reached the final phase of this worm bin's life cycle. After 140 days of composting and then another 45 days of foraging, we're now starting into the migration of the worms out of the material. So that's it for the video. I've got a couple things to put away and clean up, but I'm not going to waste your time with that because that's boring. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day.